Clara Hayes had seen enough of the sky to last 3 lifetimes, but right now, all she wanted was a decent nap. She was crammed into seat 22B on a routine cross-country flight, her shoulder pressed against the cool plastic of the window. Outside, the familiar blue of 35,000 feet was peaceful, but inside Clara, the peace was hard-earned and often fragile. She was 32, small for a woman who'd flown massive Air Force transport planes, and dressed in simple jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt. To the casual eye, she was just another tired traveler. To her, she was a person trying to outrun a past that still stung. A quiet hero who'd been labeled a loud liability, the nickname they'd given her in the 17th Airlift. Squadron was Ace, a name of respect she'd earned by flying more dangerous supply missions than anyone else. But the name that stuck with the brass after her last flight was Disruptor. 3 years ago, on a C-130 flight over a remote desert, she'd been carrying critical supplies when the plane's left inboard engine began to overheat. Maintenance had ignored her warning from the pre-flight check, and now her superior, the rigid Colonel Davies, was barking orders over the radio. Hold course. Land at the closest strip, even if the runway is dirt. But Clara knew the truth. That dirt strip was unstable, and the heavy, unbalanced load would make a crash a certainty. She looked at her crew, saw the fear, and made a choice that cost her everything. She banked hard, dumped essential but non-critical fuel, and flew 40 miles further to a proper military base, saving the crew, the plane, and the most vital cargo. She landed safely. The report read, "Gross insubordination. Demonstrated poor command judgment regardless of outcome." She was stripped of her flight status and given a desk job, the ultimate slap in the face. She resigned a year later. Now she was just Clara, heading back to her small suburban home near Pensacola, Florida, trying to forget the roar of the big engines she missed so much. She closed her eyes. A harsh, grating voice yanked her awake. "I need a doctor. Now! Is there a doctor or EMT on this flight?" Clara blinked, disoriented. The cabin lights were on, but the usual low hum of the engines was spiked with a jittery, panicked energy. The flight attendant, a young man named Mike, was sprinting toward the front of the plane, his face pale and slick with sweat. "What's going on?" someone shouted. Mike didn't stop, just yelled back, "The captain! He's collapsed! It's the pilot, he's down!" A gasp went through the cabin. People started unbuckling their belts, craning their necks. Clara's heart, which had been in neutral for 3 years, slammed into high gear. Her mind went straight to the cockpit, assessing the weight distribution, the weather, and the speed. Pure habit. The co-pilot, a woman named Sarah, came over the intercom, her voice tight but attempting professionalism. "Folks, this is your first officer. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. We are declaring an emergency and preparing to divert. Everything is fine. Please remain seated." Everything was not fine. Clara recognized the tremor in the woman's voice. A single pilot flying a massive commercial jet, especially one suddenly dealing with an emergency diversion, was operating at maximum stress capacity. Then, from the front row, a figure rose. He was massive. 6'5", shoulders that strained his golf shirt, and a clean, sharp haircut. He wore expensive casual clothes and had the coiled, lethal presence of someone who was used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. He was likely a high-level military or law enforcement officer on leave. He looked like the hero you'd want in a crisis. He moved quickly to the area around the galley, surveying the scene with an intense, zeroed-in focus. He spoke with a deep, resonant voice that cut through the fear like a knife. "I'm Captain Thorne, U.S. Navy SEAL. I have medical training and I'm going to assist with the pilot." He moved to the cockpit, and the door was opened for him by the frantic flight attendant. He disappeared inside. The cabin held its breath. 5 minutes later, Thorne returned, looking grimmer than before. He scanned the rows, his eyes intense. The pilot, he confirmed, was unconscious. Then the true terror arrived. The plane bucked violently, dropping a sickening 10 feet. Luggage shifted overhead. The emergency lights flickered. The first officer, Sarah, called out again, her voice now high-pitched and strained. "Captain Thorne, we have an altitude loss. I can't regain control. The trim is failing. I'm alone up here. I need assistance now." Captain Thorne faced the stunned passengers. His gaze was iron, his voice booming and utterly devoid of doubt. Listen up. I need a pilot. Commercial, military, crop duster, I don't care. Can anyone fly this plane? The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. A 60-year-old man in a suit, a hobbyist with a private license, timidly raised his hand. I flew a Cessna 172 once. Thorne ignored him. His eyes swept over the men. Clara Hayes felt a familiar hot urgency rise in her chest. This was not a moment for quiet dignity. This was a moment for service. She unbuckled her belt, stood up slowly in her cramped aisle, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. I can, she said. I'm a pilot. Captain Thorne's intimidating gaze finally landed on her, taking in her slight frame, her plain clothes, her tired face. He hesitated for only a fraction of a second, but that fraction was an eternity. The dismissal in his eyes was instant and complete. We need a real pilot, ma'am, he snapped, his voice impatient and sharp. Someone with actual jet experience. Get back in your seat. The insult, the casual cruelty of his underestimation felt like the old Colonel Davies talking. It was a familiar, painful sting. But this time, lives were on the line. And this time, Clara would not take a desk job. Captain, she said, her voice rising, losing its quiet fatigue and finding its old, steel-edged command. I didn't say I flew a plane. I said I can fly this plane. Now get out of my way, or the only thing you'll be commanding is a crash. The sheer force of her unexpected, unwavering authority stunned the Navy SEAL into silence. The Navy SEAL Captain Thorne didn't move. He stood, blocking the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief and impatience. He had been trained to assess threats, and in his experience, a threat didn't look like a weary, petite woman in seat 22B. You're talking to a decorated officer. Ma'am, Thorne said, his voice dropping slightly, laced with patronizing control. This isn't a game. We need an aviator, a professional. Step aside. And I'm telling you, I was an Air Force transport pilot for 9 years, flying C-130s in and out of hot zones, Clara countered, taking a deliberate step toward him. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, were now sharp, reflecting the fluorescent cabin light like polished steel. Those planes are bigger than your average passenger jet and less forgiving. If you want a professional, here I am. If you want to waste time arguing, the first officer up there is about to run out of runway. The man with the Cessna license piped up, Maybe she can handle it, Captain. Let her try. Thorne hesitated. He looked at Clara, then at the cockpit door, which was briefly opened as the co-pilot Sarah yelled, I need help! We're losing the trim wheel! Losing the trim wheel. That was serious. It meant the control surfaces were unstable, and the plane was fighting Sarah's input, trying to pitch up or down on its own. It required two steady, strong hands working in tandem to correct. Thorne swore under his breath, stepping aside with a movement that was more a frustrated surrender than acceptance. Fine, but you follow my lead, Disruptor. I'm maintaining order. He didn't know he'd used her old, hated nickname, but to Clara it sounded like it. Clara didn't waste breath correcting him. She pushed past, grabbing the handrail and moving down the aisle, her energy completely transformed. She wasn't tired Clara anymore. She was ace. She entered the cockpit. It was a chaotic scene of blinking red and amber lights, blaring electronic alerts, and the frantic sight of First Officer Sarah pulling back hard on the control yoke, her face streaked with tears. I can't hold it, Sarah cried, her arms shaking. Clara was instantly assessing the layout. This was a Boeing 737, not her familiar C-130. But the fundamentals were the same. A yoke, rudder pedals, and a throttle quadrant. Move over, Clara commanded, her voice steady and calm, instantly cutting through Sarah's panic. What's the problem? The captain had a massive heart attack, Sarah sobbed. And the vertical stabilizer trim is failing. It keeps trying to push the nose down. I'm fighting it manually. Give me room, Clara said, settling into the left seat. She placed her hands gently but firmly on the yoke, immediately feeling the immense force fighting her. It was like wrestling a bear. I'm Clara. I've got you. Captain Thorne crowded into the small space behind the two seats, his presence overwhelming. He leaned in and spoke loudly, assuming Clara needed the simplest instructions. Just pull back, ma'am. Keep the nose up. Easy does it. Clara didn't even look at him. Thorn, sit down and buckle up. You're in my flight deck now. If you're not flying, you're dead weight and a distraction. Get out of the jump seat and move to the back. Thorn blinked, utterly shocked at the sudden, absolute change in command structure. He was used to being the alpha in every room. Clara focused on Sarah. Sarah, I need altitude, speed, and fuel status. Talk to me. Altitude 25,000, speed 420 knots, Sarah gasped, relieved to have someone sharing the physical strain. Fuel is good for another hour. We're over the Ohio Valley. Closest airport is Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International. Clara absorbed the data. Too fast, too high, and with the failing trim, an approach and landing would be suicide. Thorn, if you're still there, Clara said, her eyes fixed on the instruments. Call the tower. Tell them we have an unresponsive pilot, a trim failure, and we need a clear runway and emergency services. We are burning off speed and fuel now. Tell them to clear the air around us. We are an unstable heavy. Thorn surprisingly obeyed. The shift in his attitude was not respect yet, but the dawning realization that this small woman was speaking a language he didn't understand, but which was clearly the right language for the moment. Clara began the slow, delicate work of bringing the plane under control. She used tiny, precise movements on the yoke, feathering the throttle to bring the speed down without stressing the already compromised control surfaces. It was a painstaking mental chess match with 80,000 pounds of metal. Sarah, I need you to cycle the trim breaker, Clara ordered. It might reset. Sarah fumbled for the overhead panel, her fingers shaking. Thorn watched, his body tense, ready to intervene, but he had nothing to do. He saw the sheer, calm strength in Clara's arms, the way her muscles barely moved, yet the plane slowly responded to her iron will. Negative, Sarah said after cycling the breaker. Still no manual control over the trim. It's a hard jam. Clara nodded, her face grim. She was now fighting two battles, keeping the plane level and planning a way to land without the vertical stabilizer working properly. It was like driving a car where the steering wheel kept trying to turn to the right by itself. Okay, Sarah, Clara said. We're not landing like this. We have to use the engines for pitch control. I need you on the throttles. Every movement has to be small, slow, and perfectly synchronized with my hands. You are my throttle jockey. Can you do it? Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, taking a deep, shaky breath. She looked at Clara, seeing not a celebrity hero or a condescending superior, but a fellow aviator, a brave, competent woman who was trusting her. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said, her voice now firm. Tell me what to do. Clara Hayes was finally back where she belonged, at the center of a crisis, making split-second choices and proving once again that true strength didn't come from a rank or a title, but from a cool head and an unbroken spirit. They were stable, but landing was still a long, dangerous way off. The next 40 minutes were the most terrifying and grueling of Clara's life, even counting her most dangerous desert runs. She and Sarah worked in a tight, silent rhythm. Clara commanded the yoke, manually fighting the failed trim, while Sarah's hands danced on the throttles, using tiny bursts of engine power to force the nose up or down when the control surfaces were exhausted. Captain Thorn, now relegated to the jump seat, was silent. He had picked up the radio, his powerful voice now acting as the clear, concise communication link to the ground. He heard the tower chief, a seasoned controller, sound increasingly strained as Clara detailed the improvised, non-standard procedure they would attempt. Flight 373, confirm. You plan to use differential engine thrust for the final approach pitch angle control? The tower controller asked. Affirmative, tower, Thorn relayed, glancing at Clara. Pilot Clara Hayes reports it's the only option. We are unable to utilize the trim. Prepare for a high-speed flapless approach. A high-speed flapless approach. The words alone were enough to make a seasoned pilot sweat. The flaps, which usually slowed the plane down for a safe landing speed, were now a risk. With the trim failing, deploying the flaps could shift the center of gravity too suddenly, causing the plane to immediately nosedive into the ground. Clara had calculated the risk. Better to land fast and slide than stall and crash. As they began their long, shallow descent, Clara's mind flashed back to the desert. The radio crackled. Colonel Davies to Ace, confirm you are holding the vector. Do not deviate, Ace. That's a direct order. Clara watched the gauges. The engine fire warning light was blinking. The temperature was climbing too fast. She'd flagged this exact sensor during the pre-flight, and maintenance had signed off on it anyway. Colonel, negative, she'd replied, her voice steady. The Vector puts us on a dirt strip with an explosive ordnance cargo on a runaway engine. I am diverting to the main base. I repeat, diverting to save the plane. Request fire trucks on approach. Hayes, that is insubordination. I will have your wings. Davies screamed. Save the plane, sir, Clara had whispered to herself, ignoring him. She'd saved it, and he'd kept his promise. He took her wings. Now, in the 737 cockpit, the engine fire warning light on the captain's panel flickered briefly, red, then vanished. Clara's heart jumped. Sarah, did you see that? Clara asked quietly, easing the yoke. See what, Clara? The firelight on the left console. It flickered. No. Maybe a brief power surge? Sarah said, her voice tight with focus on the throttles. Clara focused. But the brief flicker, the sudden sharp ping of a system alert that vanished before she could read it, triggered a memory, the exact same erratic sensor behavior that had happened 3 years ago before the engine failed. This wasn't just a trim failure. This was a deeper recurring electrical or maintenance issue. Someone had signed off on this plane, just like they had signed off on her C-130, ignoring a critical warning. The thought galvanized her. It wasn't just about saving the passengers now. It was about exposing the rot that had ruined her career and now threatened hundreds of lives. Sarah, Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. We are not just landing this plane. We're landing a crime scene. Before we hit that runway, I need you to find the last maintenance log in your flight bag and take a picture of it with your phone. Send it to yourself. Now. I don't care what it says. Just do it. Sarah, confused, glanced back at Thorne, who was busy talking to the tower. She saw the absolute sincerity and fierce determination in Clara's eyes. This woman was risking everything. Why? Sarah mouthed silently. Because, Clara replied, her eyes fixed on the distant runway lights. They're going to blame the pilot, just like they blamed me. That log is the truth. Sarah, with shaky hands, reached for her bag. Tower, we are 2 miles out, speed 210 knots. Gear is down and locked. Prepare for hard landing, Thorne boomed, giving the final grave notification. Landing checklist complete, Sarah confirmed, a small shudder running through her as she snapped the photo of the log. Engine power to idle, Clara commanded. Hold the yoke! The plane sank. It wasn't gentle. It was fast, a controlled, violent drop. Clara's arms strained against the yoke as she fought the plane's desire to crash. The ground rushed up. The wind screamed past the cockpit windows. Thump, screech, roar. The landing gear slammed onto the runway with crushing force. Tires blew out. The plane shuddered, fighting for traction, sliding sideways. The G-forces pressed everyone into their seats, but Clara held the yoke steady, her entire body rigid. Brakes! Full reverse thrust! Sarah, help me with the nose! They fought the beast down the runway, sparks flying until, with a final violent lurch, the plane stopped dead on the concrete. Silence rushed in, broken only by the sobs and then the loud, grateful cheers of the passengers. In the cockpit, Sarah burst into tears of relief and exhaustion. Thorne, his SEAL composure cracked, leaned forward and placed a hand, heavy with respect, on Clara's shoulder. Clara didn't cry. She sat motionless, breathing hard, looking at the blinking lights. She had saved them all, but she knew her fight had just begun. The scene on the tarmac was chaos. Fire trucks doused the smoking wheels. Ambulances waited. Passengers spilled out onto the runway, hugging the flight attendants and cheering for the 2 pilots who had saved them. Clara Hayes was the last to emerge from the cockpit. Her body ached, her muscles screaming from the sheer force required to manually fly the plane. Sarah, the co-pilot, hugged her in the aisle before being escorted away by emergency personnel. As Clara stepped onto the mobile staircase, a sea of cameras and officials greeted her. But the noise died down when she was intercepted by a man in a crisp corporate uniform, a jacket and tie that seemed wildly out of place next to the wreckage of the jet. He was a tall, Imposing man with an expensive haircut and a cold, familiar set to his jaw. He smiled widely, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Pilot Hayes," he said, extending a hand she reluctantly shook. "Colonel Davies retired, now Chief Safety Liaison for Airlink Maintenance Services." "I suppose congratulations are in order." Clara felt a wave of icy shock. Colonel Davies, the man who'd ruined her career, who'd ignored her maintenance warnings, and who had branded her the disruptor, was now here, at the crash site, representing the company whose faulty equipment she suspected had caused the incident. "Colonel Davies," Clara replied, her voice flat. "A rough landing, but a good save. My guess is the investigation will look closely at the trim actuator and the auxiliary power unit." Davies's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He steered her away from the cameras toward a black SUV, whispering conspiratorially, "Look, Hayes, we all know what happened. You were brought in during an unprecedented crisis. You did your best, certainly, but let's be realistic. The flight recorder will show the plane dropped altitude severely and the landing was well over speed. We need to control the narrative here." "The narrative is that the plane suffered a critical flight control failure that was logged and ignored," Clara shot back, ignoring his attempt at a friendly tone. "It's the same shoddy work that you covered up 3 years ago, Davies." Davies stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. "I don't know what chip you have on your shoulder, Hayes, but I'm telling you how this is going to go. We'll report pilot incapacitation, a heroic effort by the first officer, and a civilian assist who took an unavoidable risk to bring it down. The landing will be chalked up to adverse, unpredictable air conditions. You get a medal, we get to keep our maintenance contract. Everyone's happy. And the truth?" Clara demanded. "You'll let this happen again?" "The truth is," Davies sneered, suddenly dropping all pretense of respect, "you're a loose cannon, Clara. You always were. You don't follow procedure. You took an unstable plane and landed it fast, proving you lack the finesse for commercial air travel. You saved it by brute force, not skill. You're lucky you aren't being arrested for a violation of federal airspace procedure." The injustice was a physical blow. Just as before, the system was trying to erase her competence and cover its tracks, using her success as a new way to brand her a failure. Before Clara could respond, a hand clamped down firmly on Davies's shoulder, spinning him around. It was Captain Thorne. He looked tired, but his gaze was even more intense than it had been in the cabin. He had been quietly listening from a short distance away. "Retired Colonel," Thorne said, his voice hard, like stones rubbing together. "I was in the cockpit. I saw the telemetry and I heard the communications. The trim wheel was fighting Pilot Hayes with the force of 2 grown men. She used the engines and a C-130 approach to land a civilian jet with 0 casualties. That was not brute force. That was genius." Davies forced a laugh. "Captain Thorne, I appreciate the passenger perspective, but this is a complex FAA-level investigation, not a PR stunt." "I'm not a passenger," Thorne countered, leaning into Davies's face. "I'm a decorated SEAL officer, and I'm about to give a sworn testimony to the National Transportation Safety Board. I'll report that Pilot Hayes acted with exemplary judgment, and I will specifically mention the erratic warning light she pointed out and the failed trim. I'll ensure your corporate safety review gets the attention of the Senate Armed Services Committee if you try to spin this for a private contractor." Davies went white. The Navy SEAL, the one who had insulted Clara barely an hour ago, was now her fiercest defender. It was a moment of true earned respect, but it wasn't enough. As Thorne was pulled away to give his statement, Davies turned back to Clara, regaining his cool. "You have your fan club, Hayes. Enjoy it. But the black box is gone and the plane is impounded. Your word against the most powerful maintenance contract in the country. We'll see who wins this war." He smiled a chilling final smile. The official NTSB investigators arrived. They were courteous but dismissive, treating Clara like an enthusiastic civilian who had gotten lucky. They noted her name, took her brief statement, and confiscated the co-pilot's phone before Sarah could confirm she'd taken the photo. Clara was left standing alone, watching the massive damaged plane. She had saved 150 lives, only to find herself back in the same old, bitter fight against the system that valued money over truth. It felt like her redemption had been stolen right off the runway. Part 4. Conclusion. The twist of injustice is full. Clara Hayes was released from the official debriefing 3 hours later, exhausted but with a renewed sense of purpose. The investigation team, heavily influenced by Colonel Davies and the Airlink legal team, had thanked her for her heroic but technically flawed effort. They suggested she go home and relax. They never once asked for her professional assessment of the technical failures. She knew she had to fight this not just for herself, but for the passengers and for First Officer Sarah, who would likely be blamed for failing to control the unstable plane. This time, the truth would not be buried. Davies had been right. They took the black box. They took Sarah's phone. But he had forgotten one thing. A pilot's habits run deep. As Clara stood in the parking lot, she reached into the small utility pocket of her jeans. She pulled out a tiny silver flash drive, no bigger than her thumbnail. This wasn't a fashion accessory. It was an old military-grade voice-activated logger. She had carried it since the desert incident, a quiet insurance policy against a system that loved procedure more than truth. She had activated it the moment Thorne yelled, "Can anyone fly this plane?" It recorded everything. The frantic dialogue with Sarah, the precise moment the trim wheel seized, the sound of the engine fire warning light flickering, and the entire crucial conversation with Colonel Davies on the tarmac. But she still needed the physical evidence, the maintenance log Sarah had photographed. Sarah's phone was gone, but there was one other place Sarah, in her panic, might have sent it. Clara pulled out her own phone. She had met Sarah for only an hour in the air, but they were two aviators in a foxhole. On instinct, Clara checked her social media private messages. There it was. A blurry, hastily taken photo from Sarah, time-stamped minutes before landing, along with a single trembling text. What did I just take a picture of? The photo showed a signature and a date on the bottom of a daily inspection sheet. Just above the signature was a note, scribbled small. APU temp sensor reads erratic. Sensor requires replacement, deferred until next 100-hour check. Deferred. The plane had been cleared to fly with a known erratic electrical warning. And the person who signed off? Davies' protege at Airlink Maintenance, Clara, didn't go home. She went to a quiet internet cafe in a nearby suburban strip mall. She knew that going to the FAA or the NTSB with her small logger and a blurry photo would lead to months of closed-door investigations, allowing Davies to discredit her as a vengeful former employee. She needed immediate exposure. She needed a public court. She uploaded the audio file from the flash drive and the photo from Sarah's message. She wrote a careful, anonymous letter detailing the sequence of events, explaining that she was the civilian assist and why she believed the incident was caused by ignored maintenance, not pilot error. She sent the package to the biggest, most respected independent aviation safety blogger and investigative reporter in the country. Then, she deleted the files from the cafe computer and drove away. 2 days later, the blog post dropped. The title was simple: The Cockpit Tape. Navy SEAL confirms pilot's heroism, but who covered up the failure? The audio file was damning. Listeners heard Thorne's initial dismissal, followed by Clara's calm, technical brilliance. They heard the frantic alerts, the rough landing, and most crucially, they heard Colonel Davies' voice on the tarmac, trying to dismiss Clara's concerns and control the narrative. The leaked maintenance photo, with its clear note of a deferred sensor replacement, tied the whole story together. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. The airline stock plummeted. The NTSB was forced to seize the maintenance records, and a full criminal investigation was launched into Airlink maintenance services. Colonel Davies was arrested 2 weeks later, charged with obstruction of justice and falsifying federal maintenance records, stemming from both the Flight 373 incident and the subsequent reopening of Clara's own C-130 case. The closure for Clara Hayes wasn't a medal. It was justice. Her military record was formally corrected, striking the insubordination charge and replacing it with a letter of commendation for exceptional judgment and decisive action under extreme duress. A week later, Clara was sitting at a quiet coffee shop near her home when a familiar, massive figure sat down opposite her. "Pilot Hayes," Captain Thorne said, his voice deep but now quiet and respectful. He slid a crisp white envelope across the table. It was a card from the entire SEAL team he'd been traveling with, thanking her for saving their lives. "It's Clara," she replied, smiling softly. "Clara," he corrected himself. "I owe you an apology. I was arrogant. I was wrong. I judged you based on everything but your skill. You are, without a doubt, the best pilot I have ever seen under pressure." "Thank you." Clara looked at him, seeing a good man who had the courage to admit his mistake. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "It takes a strong person to say that." "The system," Thorne mused, shaking his head. "It tries to chew up the good ones." "Not anymore," Clara said. Sipping her coffee, she had received a job offer, chief safety and compliance consultant for a major aerospace manufacturer, a role where her focus was fixing the systemic maintenance failures she had seen firsthand. It wasn't flying, but it was justice, redemption, and a chance to make sure no other pilot had to face a failing plane or a corrupt superior. Clara Hayes, the disruptor, had finally used her ability to break the rules to fix the system.